To Kate Mitchell's surprise, the air of freedom was nothing like she'd expected it to be from within the prison walls. It was intoxicating, and it filled her heart with joy and awareness of the long-awaited freedom. God, it's been 10 years, and I'm almost 30 now, thought Kate, adjusting the bag on her shoulder, which contained her few personal belongings. She still couldn't believe that freedom was awaiting for her behind the prison gates. But when the guards led her through the checkpoint and wished her good luck, Kate realized that it wasn't a dream. The fact was that Kate had spent 10 years in the state county jail for the murder of her husband, which she didn't commit. Unfortunately, the jury felt otherwise and sentenced the poor woman to time in prison. She was only 19 years old at the time. It's hard to imagine what Kate had to go through before she was released. Sure, the woman tried to appeal and even wrote up complaints and petitions for clemency, but the verdict was never overturned. Breathing in the fresh air, which smelled of morning dew, Kate went to the parking lot which was meant for the relatives of the released prisoners. The woman knew that no one would be waiting for her there. She had no illusions about it. Suddenly, Kate saw someone's face through the window of a Chevrolet parked by the side of the road, and then someone called out her name. The woman stopped and looked more closely at the woman sitting behind the wheel. Kate's face quickly lit up with a happy smile as she realized that her best friend had come to pick her up on the day of her release. "Hi Maggie, I can't even tell you how happy I am to see you," exclaimed the ex-convict with tears in her eyes. "Get in, my friend. You can tell me all about it on the way," said Maggie as she opened up the passenger door. Kate happily accepted the offer, and soon the women were driving down the freeway towards Kate's hometown. On their way home, Maggie talked to her friend about the latest news in her life, carefully avoiding the uncomfortable subject of Kate's imprisonment. But then, seeing that Kate had already adapted a little and came to her senses, she decided to get to the main point. "You know, my friend, something very strange happened to me recently. I think I saw your dead husband, and Jeffrey looked even better than before. Maggie, I told you countless times that I didn't kill my husband. I was framed, and all I want to do now is figure out who did it," Kate said with anger in her voice. "Yes, I know, I believe you. It's just that it's strange, you know? And also, I don't even know how to tell you. Well, Jeffrey wasn't alone, but he was with some woman," Maggie blurted out, having plucked up the courage. After hearing those words, Kate tried to quickly pull herself together, but despite her best efforts, she still felt a pang of jealousy. The fact that she had lived with Jeffrey for a year and a half, but there was nothing good in their lives at all at the time. That was partly because Kate couldn't get pregnant and give her spouse an heir. But it was Kate's mother-in-law who was the most furious about it, and she never failed to reproach her daughter-in-law for her inability to bear a child. Miranda Harris considered her son's marriage a mistake, and inciting hatred between the spouses, she sought only one thing: to push them into a divorce. But to her great disappointment, Jeffrey and Kate were in no hurry to separate. They even bought a luxurious house in the country together. By the wicked irony of fate, it was after that ill-fated purchase that Kate got accused of killing her husband. The investigation was so quick that the unfortunate woman didn't even have time to realize what had happened before she was told that the case was closed and she was going to be tried in court. The entire process was extremely inept and clumsy. If it weren't for the bribes paid to the right people and for the extensive connections of Miranda Harris, her daughter-in-law would have never been sentenced to 10 years in prison. Unfortunately, there was no one to defend Kate, as she had no parents and grew up in an orphanage. Kate knew that she didn't kill Jeffrey and that his body was never found. And now it turned out that her husband was actually alive and spending time in the arms of some red-haired beauty. Maggie's voice pulled Kate out of her gloomy thoughts. "You know what? I have an interesting idea as to how we can find out who set you up. But first, you need to get some rest and get your bearings. said Maggie with the mysterious look on her face. Kate shrugged her shoulders indifferently and, having turned to the window, studied the scenery outside. Since she had nowhere else to live after her release, she decided to stay at Maggie's house. There, Kate was finally able to lie down on a soft bed and watch as much TV as she wanted. But nevertheless, her body still lived by the prison schedule. The woman got up and went to bed at certain times of day, just as she did behind bars. When a week had passed since Kate's release from prison, Maggie returned to the conversation they began on the day of her release. "You know, Kate, I've been thinking, why don't we take a trip to a fortune teller? She lives on the outskirts of the town," Maggie suggested, a little embarrassed. "What would I need a fortune teller for? And how could she help me?" Kate asked, surprised. In response to her objections, Maggie started convincing Kate that this fortune teller could really see the future and the past by doing a card reading. "Well, let's give it a try," Kate replied with irony in her voice. When they arrived at the fortune teller's house, they were greeted by a plump woman in her 50s, dressed in a black dress, which only added to her mysterious and magical charm. When the fortune teller laid out her old tarot cards on the table, her face immediately turned gloomy and serious. The woman paused for a bit and then said, "I see that you were destined to face some difficult trials. I know that you have been in prison, but in order to sort things out, you need to go to the house where it all began." Having heard the woman's words, Kate shuddered and her face froze in surprise. How did she know about my past? Could this be a coincidence? Kate pondered, trying to gather her thoughts. But the fortune teller didn't say anything else, making it clear that the conversation was over. Of course, the visit to the fortune teller had made an undeniable impression on Kate. To her surprise, she realized that the fortune teller had unwittingly voiced what she had long wanted to hear. Kate realized that she simply had to go to the house that she and Jeffrey bought shortly before his mysterious death. Having asked Maggie to take her there, the woman mustered up the courage and set out to face her past. As she approached the gate, Kate cautiously peeked into the yard and saw Jeffrey's Ford sparkling with polish. So, it looks like my husband really is alive, and Maggie wasn't wrong about seeing him around town, Kate thought. At that moment, the door of the house opened, and none other than Jeffrey himself appeared on the threshold. He turned pale when he saw Kate and started gesticulating vigorously, urging her to leave. "I'm not moving from this spot until you tell me everything," Kate said in a tone that clearly wasn't open to objections. All right, but for God's sake, keep your voice down. My wife might hear us," Jeffrey pleaded. Kate cringed contemptuously. She definitely didn't expect her husband to be so rude and so mean. Meanwhile, Jeffrey just kept talking and talking about how it was all his mother's fault and that this whole scam was in fact her idea. Actually, Miranda Harris had long chosen a new wife for her son. Unlike Kate, she grew up in a wealthy family and had a reputation as a rich heiress. Miranda's beautiful plan had only one problem, and her name was Kate. That's when Jeffrey and his mother came up with the horrific plan to fake Jeffrey's death, thus making it possible for him to marry a different woman while avoiding losing any of his assets during the divorce. The scam turned out to be so very simple and so very effective. Using her connections and outright bribery, they put Kate away in prison, believing that she would be unlikely to make it out of there alive. During those 10 years, Jeffrey and his new wife had 3 children, whom the caring husband and father left in the care of their mother. "You're a bastard, Jeffrey. You stole 10 years of my life. You made me spend the best years of my life in jail," Kate exclaimed, no longer afraid of being heard. Her ex-husband tried to change the subject, but Kate was unstoppable. Tears poured down her cheeks as she thought about how hard it was for her in prison, especially since she was wrongfully accused. Kate and Jeffrey's parting was very hard and nerve-wracking. The thing was that the deceived woman had promised her ex-spouse to go to the police station and tell them about all of his crimes. On top of that, Jeffrey's new spouse came out of the house during their fight and managed to hear part of their conversation. It is worth saying that despite Jeffrey's pleas and tears, Kate kept her promise, and soon the dodgy spouse and his mother were brought before the court. Unfortunately, Miranda Harris got off with a mild scare and a solid fine, but her son was sentenced to 6 years in prison and was ordered to pay a hefty amount in moral damages to the wrongfully convicted Kate. Of course, for the woman who'd spent 10 years in prison on false charges, this was little consolation. But on the other hand, now Jeffrey was going to get first-hand experience of the comforts of prison life. The only person Kate truly sympathized with was Anna, her ex-husband's current spouse. The woman knew nothing of the Harris family's dark past and was now in a state of deep shock. Looking into Anna's eyes, Kate realized that the woman didn't condemn her and even sympathized with her in a way. After all, there was no doubt that Jeffrey should be punished for all he did. Having taken her revenge, Kate finally started her new life, which she had dreamed of for all those long years behind bars. Now, the woman had no ties to her past, which was so unfair to her. Beginning her life anew, Kate completely crossed her ex-husband out of it, while he set off on his 6-year stretch in a prison cell with other criminals like him.